They saw them, they drew them, some even claimed they heard the cries echoing through the wilderness, yet science provides no clear answers. In legends, they were monsters, predators that seemed to defy the rules of nature. But in the shadows of our world, eyewitnesses whisper, perhaps they never left. Stay until the last creature, because its voice alone could make you run. 1. Thunderbird and Impundulu, North America and Africa. Across the plains of North America, Native American tribes spoke of giant birds with wings so wide they could block out the sun. The thunderbird, they said, could summon storms with the beat of its wings, lightning flashing in its eyes. Thousands of miles away in southern Africa, the Impundulu haunted village skies, a vampiric bird that fed not only on blood, but also on the fear it inspired. Early settlers reported seeing dark shapes gliding overhead, their size dwarfing any known eagle. In 1892, ranchers in Arizona allegedly shot a thunderbird, claiming its wings stretched over 30 feet. Strangely, the body vanished, leaving only a blurred photograph in a local paper, which was never officially confirmed. In Africa, colonial hunters told stories of the Impundulu following them for days, its cry piercing the wind. Scientists think misidentified storks or extinct teratorns could explain the myths, but witnesses insist storms arrive when they appear, and once you hear its cry, you'll hear it again, even in your dreams. 2. Ahool, Indonesia. Deep in the rainforests of Java, where rivers twist through mountains and mist cloaks the canopy, lives the Ahool, or so the locals claim. Described as a giant bat or a massive winged primate, it measures nearly 10 feet from tip to tip, with gray fur and a flat ape-like face. Its name comes from the echoing Ahool call that cuts through the jungle at night. In 1925, Dutch explorer Dr. Ernest Bartels, the son of a well-known ornithologist, reported hearing the cry while camping near a waterfall. Moments later, a dark, massive figure swept overhead. He would later describe it as neither bird nor bat, but something in between, a flying predator unknown to science. Skeptics suggest the giant Javan bat or large owls could explain it, but no known species matches the Ahool's reported size. Villagers speak of fishermen taken from canoes, never to be seen again, and warn children not to stray near rivers after dark. The jungle hides many creatures, but some, like the Ahool, may hide too well. 3. Bunyip, Australia. In the wetlands and billabongs of Australia, Aboriginal legends tell of the bunyip, a fearsome water predator said to lurk beneath still waters. Descriptions vary widely. Some say it has a dog-like face and flippers, while others claim it has a long neck like a serpent. But all agree it kills silently, dragging prey down without a ripple. Early European settlers recorded eerie howls at night, and strange bones were found in riverbeds, puzzling naturalists. Some believe these may have been remains of extinct megafauna, like the Diprotodon. Others argue they belonged to something still alive. Aboriginal elders share stories of travelers vanishing along river banks, their footprints abruptly ending at the water's edge. In the 19th century, newspapers reported sightings of a monster seal in the Murray River, but no proof ever emerged. Today, the swamps remain quiet, but when the reeds sway and the water stirs without wind, locals know to step back for. Mapinguari, Amazon rainforest. Somewhere in the uncharted Amazon, legends tell of a beast that walks on two legs, towering over men, with a body covered in coarse red hair. The Mapinguari is said to have the claws of a bear, the strength of 10 men, and a mouth in its stomach. Hunters claim its smell alone can knock a person unconscious. Some believe it is a surviving giant ground sloth, thought to have gone extinct thousands of years ago. The Mapinguari appears in both ancient tribal stories and modern encounters. In 1937, rubber tappers reported being stalked by a creature that left huge human-like footprints. Their bullets had no effect, and the sound it made, a guttural roar, sent them fleeing. Biologists suggest misidentified bears or jaguars, but none match the footprints or the bizarre stomach-mouth description. The deeper you go into the rainforest, the more the air changes, and sometimes, they say, it carries the odor of something watching. 5. Grootslang, South Africa. The Richtersveld Desert hides many secrets, but none more feared than the Grootslang, a serpent said to be older than humankind. Legends say it was one of the first creations of the gods, part elephant, part snake, with the cunning of both. Caves, known as the Wonder Hole, are said to be its home, leading to a tunnel system filled with diamonds, but those who seek treasure often disappear. In 1917, an English prospector vanished near such a cave. His camp was found abandoned, tools scattered, and no signs of struggle, except for huge, scale-like impressions in the sand. Some speculate the Grootslang is an exaggerated python, while others think it's a prehistoric creature like Titanoboa. But locals know better. They say if you hear hissing in the dark, you have two choices: leave immediately or never leave at all. 6. Mokèlé-Mbèmbé, Congo. In the swamps of the Congo Basin, a creature resembling a living dinosaur has captivated explorers for centuries. The Mokèlé-Mbèmbé, meaning one who stops the flow of rivers, is described as a massive, long-necked beast like a sauropod, with a strong tail and gray-brown skin. French missionaries in the 18th century recorded stories of it capsizing canoes and attacking hippos. In the 1980s, Western scientists claimed to find huge tracks in the mud and heard roars unlike any known animal. Biologists often dismiss these stories as misidentifications of elephants or hippos, but the remoteness of the area leaves room for mystery. Eyewitnesses say the creature surfaces quietly, almost curiously, before vanishing under the murky water. And when the river suddenly falls silent, they warn, it might be watching you. 7. Siren Head, final creature. Standing over 10 meters tall, impossibly thin and crowned with two rusted sirens, in place of a head, Siren Head is no ancient myth, but a modern nightmare. First spotted in remote forests, it moves with unnatural stillness until it calls, using the voice of someone you know. Witnesses describe hearing lost loved ones calling for help, only to find themselves walking deeper into the trees, the voice always just ahead. Then the sirens change, blasting static, distorted screams, and fragments of emergency broadcasts. By then, it's too late. Some dismiss Siren Head as internet horror fiction, but others point to strange disappearances in wilderness areas and unexplained recordings of siren-like sounds captured miles from any road. Whether flesh or machine, no one knows. What is clear is that its voice can lure you to places you will never escape. Conclusion. From skies darkened by winged predators to rivers hiding ancient beasts, these 7 creatures may be legends, but legends often start with a witness. Science looks for proof, but mystery thrives between evidence and belief, and maybe, just maybe, some of these creatures still exist, waiting.